The hospital corridor was silent except for the faint beeping of monitors and the low hum of machines working through the night. It was 2:47 a.m., and young nurse Emily Carter was finishing her rounds. She had been on a double shift again, tired, overworked, but determined. Her patients weren't just names on charts, they were lives depending on her, and for Emily, saving lives wasn't a job, it was her purpose. The silence shattered when a loud crash echoed from the hospital's entrance. A man in a black jacket, armed with a handgun, stormed through the glass doors, shouting incoherent words. Panic rippled through the staff and patients. People screamed, doors slammed, alarms blared. Emily froze for only a second before instinct took over. "Everyone get down, lock the doors," she shouted, ushering patients into rooms, flipping beds to block doorways, and shielding the children in the pediatric ward. She had trained for emergencies, but not this, not for a man with hate in his eyes and death in his hands. The gunman moved down the hallway, firing wildly. Bullets splintered the walls, glass exploded, the air filled with chaos. But Emily didn't run, she couldn't. Behind her were 6 patients, 2 unable to walk, 1 on oxygen, and a terrified boy crying for his mother. She knew if she ran, they'd die. She pushed a rolling cart toward the gunman, screaming, "Stop, please," not as a plea for her life, but as a desperate attempt to buy time. The man turned his weapon toward her and fired. 1 bullet struck her shoulder, the second tore through her side, and the third hit her leg. Emily collapsed, pain flooding her body. She fell to the cold tile floor, gasping for air, her blood pooling beneath her scrubs. Still, she crawled forward, dragging herself toward a fallen patient who was too weak to move. "Stay down," she whispered, her hand trembling as she pressed against the woman's wound. The gunman raised his weapon again, but before he could fire, the hospital security team tackled him to the ground. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Emily's world faded into darkness. The last thing she heard was someone shouting, "We've got her, stay with us." She woke up 2 days later, wrapped in white sheets, her body bandaged, her arm in a sling. Her mother was by her side, tears streaming down her face. "You're a hero," she said softly, kissing Emily's forehead. But Emily just stared blankly at the ceiling. "I didn't do it to be a hero," she whispered. "I just didn't want anyone else to die." The news spread everywhere. Nurse shields patients from gunman, takes 3 bullets. Reporters called her brave. The nation called her selfless. But Emily didn't feel like either. The images replayed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The screams, the shots, the blood. The guilt ate at her because even though she saved lives, 1 man had still died that night before police arrived. 48 hours later, as she sat on her couch with her arm in a sling, she heard a knock. No, not a knock, a doorbell. Slow and steady, ding, dong. She froze. It was late evening, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Her mother called from the kitchen. "Do you want me to get that?" Emily shook her head. "No, I will." She limped to the door, her heart racing, unsure why. When she opened it, she gasped. Standing there was a man in a dark green uniform, his face weary, eyes filled with tears. He was holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "Miss Carter?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I'm Sergeant James Walker," he said. "My wife, Angela, was one of your patients that night." Emily's eyes widened. She remembered Angela, the frail woman in room 214, the one she had crawled toward after being shot. "Is she okay?" Emily asked. The sergeant nodded, voice breaking. "Because of you, she's alive. The doctors said if you hadn't covered her wound when you did, she would have bled out before help arrived." He took a shaky breath, looking at her with deep gratitude. "I came here to thank you. I've been in the army for 12 years, and I've seen courage in battle, but what you did, unarmed, wounded, still protecting others, that's the kind of bravery soldiers are taught to honor." Emily's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since that night, she allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from release. "I didn't think," she said quietly. "I just acted." Sergeant Walker nodded, his voice steady now. "That's what heroes do." He placed the bouquet in her trembling hands. "From me, from my wife, from every family whose loved one you saved. Thank you." Emily stood silently as he turned to leave, the weight of his words settling deep within her heart. She closed the door, walked to the couch, and stared at the lilies. For the first time, she didn't see blood when she closed her eyes. She saw light. Days later, letters began arriving, hundreds of them, from patients, strangers, soldiers, even children. They called her Angel Nurse. The hospital created a special wing in her honor, the Carter Healing Center. Yet Emily remained humble, returning to her duties once she healed. When asked why she went back to the same ward where she was shot, she simply smiled and said, "Because people still need care, and if I can stand, I'll stand for them." Years later, that night remained in her memory, not as a nightmare, but as a reminder that courage doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a gun. Sometimes it wears scrubs stained with blood, holding trembling hands in the dark. And every time a patient thanked her, she'd just smile softly and say, "Don't thank me, just live." Sometimes, real courage doesn't come from training or weapons, but from the heart of someone who refuses to stand by when others are in danger. The night nurse Emily Carter took 3 bullets protecting her patients. She wasn't thinking about bravery or headlines. She was thinking about people who couldn't defend themselves. That's what made her different. That's what made her unforgettable. Emily's story began like any other ordinary night in the city hospital, where exhaustion had become her daily companion. Her eyes were heavy, her steps slow, yet her spirit refused to give up. She had chosen this life knowing it was hard, but never realizing how hard it could truly become. That night, when the gunman stormed the hospital, chaos replaced calm in a blink. One moment she was checking vitals, the next she was diving to the ground as bullets ripped through the sterile silence. Everyone screamed, nurses hid behind counters, patients cried out for help, but Emily didn't run. Her fear was real. Her heart pounded in her chest, but something stronger rose above it, the duty to protect. She saw the terrified eyes of an old man clutching his chest monitor, the trembling hands of a young mother shielding her newborn, and the frozen fear of a cancer patient too weak to move. Without thinking, Emily threw herself in front of them, yelling for others to take cover. When the first shot hit her, pain exploded through her shoulder. The second one spun her around. The third drove her to the floor. Yet, even as her vision blurred and her strength faded, she refused to let go of the patient she was shielding. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You're going to be okay. Stay down. Don't move." When police finally arrived and subdued the gunman, Emily was unconscious, surrounded by shattered glass and chaos. But even as she lay bleeding, her hand remained outstretched over her patients, a symbol of protection stronger than fear. In the ICU, her colleagues called her a miracle for surviving. Reporters called her a hero. The world saw courage, but Emily only saw loss. She replayed the screams in her head, the sound of gunfire, the face of the man she couldn't save. She questioned herself again and again. Why did I live when he didn't? And that question haunted her every night. 2 days later, when her doorbell rang, Emily was sitting quietly, staring at the wall. Her arm was bandaged, her leg wrapped, her soul heavy. The sound startled her. She wasn't ready to face anyone, but something about the ring, soft, patient, almost hesitant, made her rise. When she opened the door, she didn't find a journalist or a hospital official. She found a soldier, a man with eyes that had seen war, yet glistened with gratitude. He introduced himself as Sergeant James Walker. His wife, Angela, had been one of Emily's patients during the attack. The frail woman Emily had crawled to protect even after being shot. The sergeant's voice trembled as he spoke, his hands shaking as he held a small bouquet of lilies. "My wife is alive because of you," he said, each word carrying the weight of emotion. "I've fought battles overseas, but what you did that night, that's a different kind of bravery. You didn't have armor, you didn't have a weapon, you only had your heart." Emily didn't know what to say. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the flowers, simple, pure white. He placed them in her hands gently and said, "You saved more than lives that night. You reminded us all what humanity still means." When he left, Emily stood there motionless for minutes, the lilies trembling in her grasp. Then, for the first time since the shooting, she smiled, not a smile of pride but of quiet peace. She finally understood that she hadn't failed. She had done what she was meant to do, stand between death and the innocent, no matter the cost. The next morning, she returned to the hospital, still limping but determined. The halls that once echoed with screams now greeted her with applause and tears. Her fellow nurses embraced her, patients thanked her, but Emily just shook her head and said, "Don't thank me, thank life, thank the chance to start again." Days turned into weeks, and the hospital slowly healed. Emily's story spread far beyond the walls of the city. Letters came from around the world, soldiers, doctors, mothers, children, all writing to tell her how her courage inspired them to care more, to love deeper, to never give up when things seemed hopeless. One letter stood out. It came from a little boy who had been in the hospital that night. In shaky handwriting he wrote, "Dear Nurse Emily, I was scared that night, but you told me not to cry. You said everything would be okay. It was. You are my hero." Emily held that letter against her heart, tears falling silently. She realized then that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and still choosing to stand up. She had faced death, but what defined her was the life she protected. Years later, the hospital built a new wing named after her, the Carter Healing Center. The dedication ceremony was filled with doctors, patients, families, and veterans. As Emily stood at the podium, her voice soft but steady, she said, "People call me brave, but I wasn't brave that night. I was scared. I just couldn't let fear win, because if one person stands up when it matters most, others find the strength to rise too." The crowd fell silent. Then came applause, not loud or wild, but heartfelt and sincere, like a collective breath of gratitude. That night, Emily went home, placed the boy's letter and the lilies on her windowsill, and whispered to herself, "This is why I lived." From that day forward, she carried no guilt, no fear, only purpose. She understood that the truest heroes don't seek recognition. They simply act when humanity needs them most. And every time the hospital lights dimmed and the halls grew quiet, Emily Carter would walk through them with the same grace, the same calm, and the same heart that once stood unarmed against darkness, reminding everyone who crossed her path that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply choose love over fear.